It's a new year. You're thinking about your resolutions and your goals for the year ahead. You look over to your crammed bookshelf or your messy TBR piles and think about all the books that you've bought and haven't read, or maybe ones that you read but didn't like. Or maybe it's the digital equivalent. You look at your e-reader or your audiobook app and you scroll past an infinite list of titles and covers. You're overwhelmed and you wonder, how did you get to this point? How did you end up with all of these books? It's actually not that hard to work out why. In the modern reading landscapes, there's many reasons why. Because for a certain percentage of people, overconsumption has become a standardized norm. And so for those of you who feel like you may be affected by this kind of problem, I want to talk you through it and help you to work out how to move forward. If you've watched my previous video regarding the unhaul book trend, you may realize the fact that I'm not always supportive of large unhauls as the solution to the overconsumption problem. But make no mistake, I'm not out here claiming that I support everyone just rampantly buying books all of the time, no questions asked. I try to be a realist. I understand that readers come from a lot of different walks of life and have a lot of different experiences. And so, I always advocate for you to consider your own personal situations. And I know that in this current world and in this current publishing landscape, companies are wanting you to buy and to constantly consume. And so it is important for me to also address the other side of the conversation and address those readers who may feel pulled to buy continuous books constantly. So how did you get to this point? Let's start by breaking down the reasons why you may have gotten here. If you're watching this, you are probably already familiar with book social media, and so I have to just mention this up front. The main three, in terms of dominance, are BookTok, BookTube, and Bookstagram, and influencers in these communities are now the main ways that many readers get recommendations for new books. BookTok made me buy it became a catchphrase for a reason, and there's a reason why the publishing houses wanted to encourage the usage of that slogan as well. Books became big, and so they encourage you to buy them. But it's not just specific books that will use social media as a marketing tactic. The content machine mandated by these platforms means that in order to keep up, you need to keep reading. And the logical extension of that can be that you need to keep buying books. A viewer of book content on social media may look at an influencer's What I Read in a Month roundup, and you may feel pressured to read that much or to try and keep up with that same pace. And that's just if you're a viewer. If you yourself are also making content based around your reading habits, it gets even worse. A lot of the highest performing book content on social media is based around consumption. It's the hauls, it's the unhauls, it's bookstore vlogs, what I got in my Illumicrate box, for example. And to regularly make this content necessitates consumption in order to keep it up. Now, I say consumption because I know that for a lot of people that would mean spending money. A lot of the time you have to front up money in order to do this. But once you get deep into the influencer space, I am aware that a lot of this stuff may just be given to you or handed to you. And so as a result, that is consumption, but I know that you're not necessarily spending in order to maintain that level of consumption. I just want to make sure that distinction is clear. If you're not an influencer, though, and you're just a regular reader, and you are influenced to buy a lot of books as a result of that, then that is your own money that is being spent in order to maintain this hobby. But we're not entirely done with the internet, because alongside book social media, which is a pretty obvious factor you may have already considered, there's also book reviewing platforms such as Goodreads and, to a lesser extent, the Storygraph, which can also encourage overconsumption. Book platforms like these do fulfill a useful purpose, and when they're used correctly, they are meant to help a reader make smarter buying decisions. By getting reviews and extra info about a book, you can decide whether it's worth your time or money. And I will admit, while I've walked away from using both of these platforms as a regular logged-in user, I will admit that I have in the past checked reviews and descriptions on Goodreads and the Storygraph in order to come up with a decision about whether to acquire a book or just to deeply research a book that I think I may be interested in reading one day. I understand the value that these platforms can provide in order to make smarter buying decisions. But Goodreads in particular has been known to encourage people to constantly check off books and to outdo their reading challenges. The race to mark more books as read means a race to acquire more books to read in order to fulfill that challenge. The platform's gamification of reading through these kind of features has led to unintended consequences. Users find themselves in a race to check off the books, and they turn it into a competition. The emphasis on quantity over quality becomes kind of apparent because instead of reading being a joyous activity, it becomes a chore, a task that you have to make yourself more productive at. I have to admit that in the past on this channel, I started issuing out reading tips and reading hacks. And while I understand that finding advice on how to incorporate more reading into your day might be useful to some people, I also disagree with the fact that you have to turn reading into a productivity measure that you need to hack in the same way that you need to find out how to be more productive with your to-do list. The platforms that are meant to enhance the reading experience turn it into a perpetual cycle of needing to buy more books, and perpetuates a cycle of overconsumption, and actually kind of turns reading into a bit of a data entry exercise that focuses on your output. I will acknowledge, again, that if used properly, these platforms can have a positive role. They can empower you to make better decisions. But the question lies in your mentality and your attitude and how you yourself interact with these platforms. I made the decision for myself that these platforms were not conducive to me, and so I chose to walk away from them. And ultimately, you need to make a decision for yourself if using these kinds of platforms are actually fueling your overconsumption, and whether or not these could actually be a harmful influence in your life. Navigating this terrain always requires you to approach it with discernment and to recognize the potential pitfalls of turning your book reading experience into a spreadsheet. Now there's pretty much infinite ways to get books. You've got corporate giant bookstores which have worldwide delivery. If you're lucky, you've got local bookshops in your area that you would probably want to support because support local businesses. You've got secondhand bookstores, you've got thrift stores, and I'm not talking just physically. The rise of platforms such as Pango Books in the Northern Hemisphere have opened up new possibilities for distributing secondhand books. You've also got audiobook platforms. This includes the obvious player, Audible, but players like Spotify as well that are getting involved in audiobooks and trying to push that as a new method for their platform. The list is endless, the variety is endless, and if you're looking at a deal, the prices can often seem too good to pass up if you're looking constantly at the sales. In fact, one thing that I am aware of, and this is not a sponsorship necessarily, because I would always say you use discernment when using these services, but I'm aware of a service called BookBub that actually looks for deals on usually ebooks across the internet. And so if you're looking for acquiring lots of good reads for cheap, signing up to services like these can be a way that you suddenly become inundated with new books that you can buy. It can be very easy, therefore, to just buy a bunch of cheap titles in one fell swoop. And when it's digital, you may not even notice the hit to your bank account or to the storage space on your e-reader. Earlier I mentioned book subscription boxes, and that becomes a way to have books constantly enter your home on autopilot without you even doing anything. A monthly book box often means 12 books a year if you're not pausing or skipping months, And that's enough to create a TBR pile on itself for the average reader. But it's likely an additional pile on top of the books that you've already bought separately. I have yet to find an example of a reader that has a book subscription box and uses that as their only source of reading material. At the heart of the book overconsumption phenomenon lies a deeply rooted aspect of human nature, which is the intrinsic drive to acquire and consume. This urge extends across all aspects of human behavior, but here we're talking about how it manifests in the realm of books. It's important to acknowledge and to understand this drive that we have as humans in order to acquire new stuff, and it's so that you can actually address the root cause of the issue. You need to be able to think introspectively, to reflect on your consumption patterns, and make more deliberate choices, including choices that may feel bad in the moment, but with the knowledge that you're probably just trying to fulfill a desire to get stuff, you can think more critically and think, okay, I can fulfill that urge a different way, or I can choose to distract myself and not go out on a book spying spree. Navigating the balance is important. And if you've had problems with overconsumption in other areas of your life outside of books, you've probably had to already deal with these psychological triggers that occur in your mind. There is a Japanese term that I've seen circulated around in book spaces, which is tsundoku, which refers to the practice of owning a pile of unread books and continuing to add to that pile. The philosophy behind this is that by having books you haven't read, you are acknowledging that you haven't yet discovered the knowledge that's within them. This concept shows a more philosophical motivation behind acquiring books, which turns it into an exploration and a humble acknowledgement that you will never be able to consume the world's knowledge. It also highlights how ignorant you may be of the world around you, especially if you decide to surround yourself with lots and lots of different kinds of stories and information. However, I will say that it is important that you don't glamorize and romanticize the concept of tsundoku to such an extent that it justifies unhealthy consumption patterns. The reason why I'm aware of the concept of tsundoku in the first place is because of social media influencers talking about the term and talking about their own collections as being an example of tsundoku. Now that can be true, but it's very easy to take something that makes it sound like you're a smart intellectual and that your collection has a higher purpose, when you're actually just continuing to acquire more books at an unreasonable pace. I would say that this is an example whereby, going back to social media, readers can have a tendency to romanticize what can actually be quite destructive practices. Is it inherently bad to practice the philosophy of tsundoku? No, but it can be used to justify bad behavior. Is it inherently bad to just randomly walk into a bookstore with no plans, even though you've already been in the bookstore 2 times that week? Not inherently a bad thing to do, but by romanticizing this in a way that readers tend to do, they can put a decorative, romantic sheen over their behavior. Again, this is where discernment is important. And it's important for you to acknowledge, am I actually engaging in something that brings me joy, or am I covering up something about myself that I don't want to acknowledge? And as I'm talking about romanticization, it's important for me to mention the final point. The word of my generation, if I was to try and pin a word of my generation, would be aesthetic, or maybe the idealized self. I have a future video planned on reading as an aesthetic, but for the moment what I will say in short is the fact that reading has become a highly aestheticized activity. Not just specific reading practices, but we tend to give reading as a general activity this really sparkly and glamorous idea. We associate someone that has a lot of books or somebody who reads as being a generally better person. There's an intellectual superiority and a social status that gets conferred now on somebody who reads. We have whole aesthetics that are dedicated to reading, such as the dark academia aesthetic. But we also have other trends such as models who read, or K-pop idols who read, or other kind of glamorous influencers who read, and the whole hot girl reads trend as well. Not that I can relate, because I've never aspired to such an aesthetic, but it is something that exists. And it's a way of trying to use books and your acquisition of books as a way to fulfill this more glamorous version of yourself, or maybe even to try and turn you into somebody else. It's not just the fact that you're a person that reads. You are whatever a reader represents. And this doesn't just apply to social media. This can even happen in real life. For example, sometimes when I've told people that I enjoy to read, I've noticed how they treat me differently as a result. They may interact with me differently. They may assume that I'm someone that's a little bit more smarter and intellectual than I actually am. And so in this way, there is a social status that gets conferred. And so the buying of books can be used to try and create and justify this higher social status that we're aiming for ourselves. You make yourself feel good by getting excited about all the books you're going to enjoy, but ultimately, you're just fulfilling a fantasy. We started with the outside world in our explanations, but now, as you've seen, as we've gone through each of the reasons for how overconsumption can occur, you realize that we've made it to you, your psychological needs. And we've also made it back to your pile of books, the result of your overconsumption and your psychological need to acquire more things, to romanticize your current life, and to make yourself into a better person. So what do you now do with this information? If you're reading this video and you realize that you are somebody who has fallen into overconsumption patterns, I'm going to assume you're feeling a bit uncomfortable. The way forward is pretty simple. You have to slow down or stop the pace of new books coming in. You can't just get out of this by doing a single unhaul and decluttering everything and doing nothing about the pace in which you are acquiring new books. Because if you were to just do an unhaul but do nothing to address your book acquisition practices, you're going to end up in the same situation in a year's time. It's time for you to be much more considerate about your consumption of books, your acquisition of books. Now, you may take inspiration from some influencers on the internet that are doing low buy or no buy seasons, or seasons whereby they focus on trying to get through their unread books in their collection. If you find that useful to you, then I encourage you to seek out some of their content and use it to motivate and inspire you in order to focus on the books that you've already have. But regardless of how you inspire yourself, you need to slow down the acquisition. If you have an overconsumption problem, the only way to solve it is to slow down your consumption. And I would actually advise for you to not attempt an unhaul or a declutter until you have stopped your consumption for some time, because when you sit with your collection as it stands and you don't attempt to add or take away, you actually have the time to reflect and to think about what you actually want in your collection. And once you've spent that time and that reflection, you can be in a better position to decide if an unhaul is actually necessary at that point. Ultimately, I wish you the best of luck with dealing with your book overconsumption. You know how you ended up with your pile of books, and now you know what you can do next. But ultimately, what you do with this is up to you. Either way, I wish you the best of luck on your journey. Thank you, friends, for watching this video. I appreciate you watching the return of Kangaroo Reads to YouTube. This channel took an extended break, and this return has been a long time coming, but I'm back to bring you more thoughts on the world of books. This video, as my comeback, is an example of what Kangaroo Reads is going to be about moving forward. This channel is about thoughtfully considering the role of books in our lives and how we engage with books and book-related media. For those of you who watched my previous videos, I am eternally grateful for your support, and I hope that you will get a lot out of my new content. Thank you once again, and until next time, happy reading.